Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. So this voiceover was supposed to go with my last video in the part where Hillary Clinton gave a very dickish, impossible, obnoxious recommendation for Trump to have a Nobel Peace Prize. And Trump said, well, I've started to like her more now without really understanding the context. And I was going to put this voiceover when I was, the night before, when I realized I was going to add that to the video. I was going to put this voiceover in. I completely forgot about it. Today's Saturday, August 16th. And so I don't think I'm going to go back and add it. The video is uploaded already. And so probably what I'm going to do is put it in the beginning of my next video. And I think it should be in the beginning of the next video. And this is about the left-right paradigm. And, this should speak to everybody. It's a very simple idea, but very profound. And so when you have like a situation where you identify certain things, like you think about now how the Epstein files are being talked about and all the Epstein stuff is being talked about by the left-wing media and the left-wing politicians who ignored it for years, purposely ignored it. They were told to stand down. It isn't for them. And, things like natural health care, organic foods, natural health care are being embraced by the right wing. A better example of this is the left wing and the hippies, the hippie movement, made organic foods possible and natural health care. So the people that I knew that were into herbal medicine and alternative health care and all those types of things were, 90% of them were liberal. I mean, people I don't know, but were pushing it out there. If you went to anybody who was talking about this kind of stuff, organic foods, you go to Whole Foods or one of those co-ops, something that's even more fringy than like Whole Foods. It's all liberal people, right? It's the most liberal people, the people who are actively working towards this kind of alternative health or anti-big pharma, anti-allopathic medicine for the most part. And when Trump rolled out the COVID vaccine and Operation Warp Speed, they were against it. But that very same vaccines that came out from that process of Operation Warp Speed, when Biden were president, they embraced it, and they threw off all their beliefs in alternative foods, right? Like you have some of those people coming back to Kennedy, the Make America Healthy movement people, some of these moms and some of these whatever it is. But you understand this, that these groups of people find out what they believe based on what the leaders of those groups, the liberals and the conservatives, and it flips back and forth. And once the conservatives embrace something like Epstein, the liberals who were so much into Me Too and all those types of things shunned the Epstein movement. And also because they were told to stand down, did whatever. But there's always like, well, if they believe in it, we don't, right? And that shows you how fucked everything is. Because you are told what you should believe in and what you shouldn't, even if it's illogical, based in your group. And these things these beliefs flip back and forth, right? Next thing you know, liberals are going to believe in pro-life and conservatives are going to be pushing abortion. Because it's just made up belief systems based in the group you identify with. And so think about how fucked up it is that you believe in something. This happened in the truth community as well. Like, the truthers got goofy with this. And it's how stupid fucking people are. Because, if you show that you have, like, it's like showing your work. When you were a kid, if you showed your work, they knew that you understood the mathematical problem. But if you ended up just copying somebody else's answer, it's like, well, you don't understand you're just fucking copying. You have no idea how to calculate something. And if you can show a reasonable process and how you come to your belief system, right? And you can describe it internally. This is what I do. This is how I come up. This is the information that I have. And this is why I believe in this. This is why I think about this. And there's deeper levels to it, all these types of things. Because it's very nuanced. But, when you just lock in and you look around, what are my people like my group? What's my group think? And you go to some site and you listen to somebody tell you what they think or how they, what the position is. and then you attack anybody that doesn't agree with you. Oh, that's what they believe, right? That's what the conservatives believe. That's what Trumpers believe. Oh, that's what the Biden people believe. That's what the liberals believe. Then you're not even functioning as a human being. You're just a part of some like insect level Borg mentality where you don't have any critical thinking skills, and you're not making your decisions for yourself, right? When I went away from the thermite explanation to the big event, because it just never was used, and I made these what I consider epic videos about that. They're now posted on kind of I did a recreation of it on my Apocalypse Now channel, and that was what brought me fully into the truth community. I came in and post that in the 2004s and 5s, that time period, and so most new truthers don't understand how big that event was for creating what is now the truth community. And so many people believed in this bullshit thermite theory. And I explained how I believed it was these mini nukes based on this guy, Dmitry Halazov's. He had this theory that he put out there or whatever it is. This guy was a Russian arms dealer. And it made total sense to me. His thing checked out more, and I did my own research on it in terms of, the high amount of thyroid-related deaths among these, what do you call them, first responders. And so, I got so much heat from all these dopes that believed in thermite, and they couldn't listen to my reasoning. Like, you didn't have to agree with me. I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit what other people believe. But you could see that my reasoning was sound. But if you get hostile with people and you don't even know why, and you start saying, no, you're wrong, you're fucking wrong, what's fucking wrong with you, you're fucking shill, this kind of stuff, then you're a gatekeeper. You've been trained to gatekeep for, now the truth community, but you don't understand you want to encourage people to come up with their own conclusions. You don't want to discourage people from individual thought and thinking about things themselves and coming to their own conclusions. Because somebody who becomes, who it's an ownership thing, where they take some ownership in their beliefs, is a much more loyal and better person in terms of, more stable in their beliefs than somebody who just doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about and just goes to other people to tell them what to think, right? Because then they're just one puppet string away from reversing their position altogether. And you see these people reverse their positions altogether. This happened with the Cubies, where somebody sent me this video. It was a young Cubie who was really big into the Q movement. And then after the debacle and all the things that didn't come true, the stuff with Trump and the election January 6th, and the guy said, look, they just keep on moving the goalposts. And he was in a group with two other Cubies, and they had been friends since childhood, like one of them. And everybody turned on him, and they accused him of being deep state shill. Because, he's like, I've known you my life. Like, the goalposts have been moved, and, I'm coming to my own conclusion. And so, like, it's the stupidest thing ever. And when you see somebody who's a part of that, like trying to shame people or, trying to control other people's beliefs, and this idea that, that your beliefs aren't based in any sort of logic and things that might be better for you. It's about what your group believes in. And that everyone in that group is peer pressured into sticking with those beliefs. That the system's fucked. And that there's no reason to vote or any of these things because it's just made up, right? Because these things can be flipped at some point. These demographics can change groups, and the belief system, the ideology can change. I mean, the fact that the only difference between the vaccine when Trump was pushing it out at warp speed and Biden took it over is that Biden was now president, and all these liberals who were, more into alternative medicine embraced the shit out of it. They were the ones wearing masks at Whole Foods, and they were embracing all the stuff that they were supposedly against, right? It was just fucking bizarre. And the right wing doing the same exact shit, right? So anyways, let me wrap this one up here. Okay, so today is Sunday, August 17th. Got a bunch of stuff to get to. Probably won't get to, well, let's just see what happens here. But this is, people get wrapped up in mundane bullshit. They, things that have no real bearing and miss out on the important things. And one of the important things is past lives, which I've talked about quite a bit. This is also going to go in the Journey series. But let's start here. My wife sent me this. In 1968, the hypnotherapist accidentally broke the matrix. She didn't break shit. They make it sound like that white people, in this case, this woman here, has been able to do something that's been known for hundreds of thousands of years, right? And by many people today, just not her, and many other hypnotherapists. She found the reality is in the mind. She hypnotized 45,000 people, and they all said the same thing, the pattern beyond logic. What she discovered would challenge everything you know about life. Meet Dolores Cannon. She didn't start as a seeker. She was a Navy wife in Arkansas, a house maker with 4 kids, a homemaker. As housemaker? I don't know. Living a simple, grounded life. But one session in 1968 changed everything. She was asked to hypnotize a woman with anxiety. What came next, no textbook could explain. The woman didn't recall childhood memories. She started describing other lives with details, like a life in 1923, then in 1850, then ancient Egypt. She gave names, places, ancients, all verifiable. Dolores thought it was imagination until she fact-checked everything, and it was real. One session turned into a lifelong obsession. Dolores spent decades interviewing unconscious mind, then called it the subconscious, not the Freudian one, but a universal field, a place where all souls are connected and all knowledge exists. She found a matrix of minds. Every session reveals some bizarre truths. We choose our parents before birth. Life is a school. Earth is a simulation. Death is not the end. Thousands said it. Different religions, cultures, same core messages. She noticed something strange, a voice speaking through her patients. It wasn't them. It was used advanced vocabulary, spoken metaphors, described quantum concepts that had never been learned. She asked who it was. The answer was the higher self. The higher self explained, humans are not random. We're volunteers. We're souls. They incarnated on Earth to raise its frequency, but forgot their mission once born. Sounds like the Matrix. It's worse. Dolores wrote 19 books, all based on these sessions. Non-fiction, no theories, just thousands of transcripts. She called the findings quantum healing hypnosis technique. Doctors mocked her. Scientists laughed, but the evidence grew. I could have done this the whole time. It could have been this thing. Well, that would have been better. Let me switch over to voiceover here. So Jesus and most of these spiritual figures understood that there was past lives. The fact that it's been rooted out of this religion, which is Christianity, and some of the other ones, is an act of control, because past lives and future lives would blow up the whole John 3:16, which is where the religion gets a hold of Christians and their, belief that they have one choice and to get to heaven, go to hell. They have two choices, or one choice, whatever you want to say, 2 options. And I guess there's purgatory too. I'm not sure about that. Maybe 3 options, but still doesn't matter. And you have one life to do it, and you only get through Christ. So that's the strong indoctrination of Christianity, right? And I started to look up ancient religions. I wanted to find out which was, when religions began. And all of these various sites, this was probably about 5-6 years ago, I looked up, I searched for a timeline of religions, and they all put Judaism as the first religion because they were prejudiced, right? It was bullshit internet stuff that was dominated by Christian, the Christian mindset. And I just did it with ChatGPT, and the timeline of religions only goes back 3,000 years before Christ. So there's only 5,000 years of religion. And they put Indus Valley religion proto-Hindu practices, fertility, Shiva-like figures, sacred animals, at between 3,000 and 12,000 BCE. There's some primitive shit before then. And then they have early Hebrewism in 1200 BCE, right? Before Christ. But the reality is that Hinduism has been around for over 100,000 years. And this is not, provable by, our history. There's just nothing there in terms of civilizations after 10,000 years. Shit all gets, things just don't get preserved. And so we only have about 5,000 years of history of artifacts and things. But the Mahabharata happened 5,000 years ago. And some thousands of years, like 50, 60,000 years before that, there was Rama. And they were both incarnations of the deity, the cosmic functionary of the preservation, Vishnu. Brahma is creation, Shiva's destruction, and Vishnu is preservation, the soul that's in charge of the preservation of the universe. And it's a temporary role. It's not a role that will be Vishnu's forever. There'll be another soul that'll step into it, because you have these roles just like any other job, even for etheric beings. These things are temporary assignments, and then you move on to something else, right? The reward for work from God is more work. It's not vacation. It's not money. It's not prosperity. You get more work, right? You master some level of work. On the spiritual field, you master something, and you are able to do work for God. And when you do enough work for God on one level, you have to move up to the next level. And that's, how divinity works. It's not about, the perks that we get from our material work, which are vacations and, time off and stuff, money and whatever. Acclaim, fame and, awards or whatever it is, right? It's not those things. Like, people work to retire. You think about our modern day workforce. People are working just to retire because they, my dad was like that. They hate their jobs, and they're waiting for that time where they don't have to do their slave job anymore. And then they retire and they fall apart because they no longer have a purpose. They no longer feel like they have to work. And so it's like that's when death sets in, because you no longer have a purpose. You no longer have a goal. You see these elderly people, playing golf and drinking. The ones that have made, this game of life is like a Monopoly game. And there was like, you could go to the poorhouse, or you can go and retire to this like luxury level place, where you're in this, gated community, kind of whatever it is. And the people have that where they retire and they have money and they're not worried about money so much. Of course they are, because inflation and, the cost of healthcare, but then they just fall apart. This happened to my dad when he retired. I've seen it, over and over again. People start drinking early on in the day or whatever. They, it's like they haven't evolved into anything where they have some spiritual purpose. It's a time where you're now connecting to the divinity within you. You're preparing for your exit from this world, but you have wisdom and things to teach to younger generations, but that doesn't exist. In a tribe it would, in a village it would, but in our modern society where kids don't want any part of their parents, grandparents, the kids see their grandkids once in a while, but that's, they look forward to these trips, but they're not really a part of the life of the family. There's these farmers that I first learned to farm from, and my family's first homestead, Mr. and Mrs. Badgett. They had great first names. The wife's name, I think, was Rainey. The husband's name was, like, he had a great name. I can't remember it. But he used to bring in hay, and he was 90 years old. And I'd go over there, we'd buy hay from him, and we'd help him with the farm, whatever. And he was still out there. He was going to die in the field, right? And his kids all couldn't wait for his property. He had it was a town near a nuclear power plant in Virginia that all the farmland was turning into suburban area, right? And so, his kids were going to wait to get the property and put it into a development or something. But anyways, so there's that, right? But getting back to it, there was a time where the soul came into consciousness of human beings. And for modern day human beings, it came from the Hindu religion. That somebody, Some saint there understood that there was a soul. And this is like 100 or 2,000 years ago. And Hinduism, as the Sanatana Dharma, as it's called, was a lot of different time periods and a lot of religious stuff that happened over long spans of, the Vedic era, the Vedic teachings, the Vedas, were long before Krishna was alive. And then, of course, Rama was, this incarnation. And they're aware of a soul, and they understood about past lives. And all of the religions have copied that. I don't want to say plagiarized, because it was something that was a gift to all humanity. But these religions have distorted that teaching, and some have forgotten it altogether. But it was something where everyone kind of knew that, because they would have past life experiences. And understanding that you had past lives, that you have to come from somewhere. Your soul is eternal. Your soul is, it was created at the beginning of the universe, so it's been around for whatever period of time. And maybe you were, an amoeba, your soul was on the material level, something like that. Who knows? Who knows where your soul was and when it was created? Like, there's different levels of soul in terms of its development and its consciousness and its proximity to divinity. But your soul manifests into a physical human person, and some people are farther along. They have the ability for abstract thought. Some of them have had past lives where they have had deep spiritual, movement. They've gone on a spiritual path before, and so they have this stuff inside of them, and it doesn't come out right away. It's there when you're a kid, but it usually doesn't. Maybe parts of it start to show themselves, and it's different from other people who don't have that, right? Like, people have whatever they have from past experiences, and it starts to emerge when circumstances change, and sometimes things never emerge. You have these samskaras, you have these, these things that have happened in the past, good and bad, the work you've done and the mistakes you've made, and these things are just waiting to flower in the right circumstances. That's why you have people who were shitty kings, had a bad life as an Asura king, a demonic king. These people like a Trump, like an ancient Trump, right? And I had a life like that. And if you haven't dealt with it, you haven't processed it and cleaned it out, and you haven't come to terms with it, at some point in your life, you're going to become powerful and rich, and you're going to turn into a prick. And everyone will be like, he was such a nice guy before he won the lottery, or he was a nice guy before he became famous, or, woman, or whatever it is. The person, whatever they might be. But, in terms of, you have these things inside of you, and it changes a person. Addictions, right? There's a great scene from The Simpsons. There's that character Barney who's always drunk, and they go back and they show his origin story, and he was like some preppy guy going to Harvard, and Homer Simpson gives him a beer, and his face immediately turns into the dope that he had, right? Like, to turn into a dopey person. It reminded me, when I was waiting tables, so I was like in my early 20s, and I worked with a girl who, maybe she had had an addiction to heroin and stuff. I think I found out some of that later. But she had sort of a difficult life, and she was having lunch with me and another waiter, and we ordered beers or something like that. I stopped drinking when I was 25, so I must have been about 21, 20, I don't know. And we were like, "Hey, why don't you have a beer?" She's like, "No, I shouldn't." And so, we didn't really pressure her, but, we encouraged her to have a beer, and she had a beer, and her face fucking changed, and it was like, it wasn't it was like she changed into Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Her face contorted, and I was like, "Holy shit." And then later I said, "Yeah, you should definitely not drink." Like, you could see that she turned evil, like it was not it did something to her. It was almost like, her face changed into a dark presence was there, almost like something like that. But anyways, the knowledge that you have had past lives is essential to any sort of growth spiritually. When a religion excludes that information from you, Christianity wants you to believe your soul was created by your body. Like, they don't have where your soul was before, because they know it came from Jesus knew, like Jesus knew. So they're taking what he knew and they're erasing it and changing the story. Because the story about John 3:16, that I'm the only one, the only way to get to heaven is through me, is when he also said the kingdom of heaven is within, doesn't work then, right? Their whole spiel, their whole stick, that you're not going to get to heaven unless you do Christianity, doesn't work with past lives and future lives, which should be obvious to everybody. That's what the case is. And I've talked about how even in this life you see where you screwed yourself over or done something great that has helped you in this life. Like you have benefited a first future version of yourself, or you've hurt a future version of yourself by behavior. And we do things all the time that we're screwing ourselves over in the future. I talked about how I didn't plug in my my razor, and I was screwing over Tuesday Paul, screwing over Thursday Paul, because I'm a future version of myself. Because then I have to charge it. Like when you say, all right, I'll take care of this later, and you leave a mess for yourself that you have to deal with later on, right? You make a mistake, and then you're punishing yourself, and you might have changed into a much better person. And we see people all the time have these issues where, they made a mistake when they were 20 and they lived to their 50 or whatever, and 70, and all of a sudden the mistake comes back around. And they're like, well, fuck, I've completely changed, and, but it's just whatever. So we see that in our own lives, this idea that our past has created our present, and our present is creating our future. Everyone can see that, or should be able to see that. If you can't, then, Jesus Christ, why are you here? So the next piece is, well, what happens before you're born? Well, you came from somewhere. If you have an eternal soul, it came from somewhere. And your soul was either in another human body that died, or it was somewhere else, and your soul is going to go somewhere else, right? And, the blanket, and I'm just referring to Christianity here, the blanket idea that, you're either going to heaven or hell, this is a one-time thing. Where is that ever anything like? Where is there only a one-time decision? Like, you're always given second, third, 100th chances, right? I mean, how many chances are people given to master something? Like, even like something as mundane as addictions and things. You get multiple chances to redeem yourself. You might have periods of remission you're working on. You're not gambling, you're not drinking, you're working on, you're fighting off these problems you have, and you might fail, multiple times, but you've tried and you've worked at it, and then one time you break through and you're over it. And so, why would that be when everything's like a school where you get multiple chances to pass tests in your life? Why would it be that you have one life to? It's silly. It's a fucking silly idea. Like everybody, you have people without abstract thought, people who, all kinds of different circumstances people are born into, all kinds of different levels of people. And you can see the difference in consciousness. And I'm not talking just about intelligence. I'm talking about like wisdom and spiritual energy and consciousness. And there's a wide variety of that. And if people open their eyes, they'll see it. Of course, if you're at a higher level, it's easier to see because you can, when you're looking down at people and you see that they're not as far along as you, it's easy. But when you're looking up at people, you don't understand them at all, right? When an ant looks at a human being, what does it see, right? Or even like a chicken or, whatever. When something that is of a lower consciousness can't even contemplate, what you go through and what your life is. Like, my dogs have almost the exact same life as I do. We spend a shit ton of time together. But a lot of the time, they don't know what the hell's going on. They have no idea what's going on with my wife and I and, the family, whatever it is. They can only comprehend up to their level. Like, they go for a walk, and they're like, oh, I see a rabbit, and I'm like, hey, look at that rabbit. And Tulsi goes, oh, I want to put that in my mouth, and she goes running after it. It's a totally different experience, right? They have no idea all the things that are happening, right? They're just, they have a limited level of perception or consciousness. But dogs have different levels. Dogs have different levels of consciousness, and certainly ones that are domesticated and are around human beings, they rise up to a higher level. I've talked about this with cows and things. So, the idea that there's only one chance is silly. It's a stupid idea, and it's for people who have been indoctrinated and don't want to think about something. They just think they want something handled, but they don't question anything. The first thing you should question is your bullshit religion. because that's the thing that they get you with. That's the first step. Because if you understand their past lives and future lives, you would live a completely different life because you're setting yourself up for the future. And you see that and you feel it, right? And so, it takes a while to integrate that into your understanding. I've explained some scars before. So going back to this woman's story about being a hypnotherapist, hypnosis is not like a great thing, but it does reveal different levels of consciousness, and people have experienced this. Anybody who's done hypnosis with people understands that there's something else going on there, and there's information that comes out. And, in my spiritual practice, Master Charji, the third master of the system, he was a brilliant guy. He worked as a high-level executive in his company. He was a brilliant salesman, a brilliant student, and he was somebody who was well-read, spoke like 29 languages, something like that. At least he had some levels of being able to speak, and he was always learning to do more. Like he was always somebody who was constantly learning to better himself, right? He was somebody with a high capacity for work. And there was this young Indian doctor that my family and I went to, and he told this story about how that this guy was in India they have a competition in terms of education that's hard for Americans to understand because of the vast amount of people. People are broken, kids are broken, their future is ruined by failing a test. Like just like if they're in third grade, and they could be somebody who's smart but isn't really into school, but the pressure their family puts on them to get educated, and there's just so many available spots for higher education and for college, and their life is dictated to them based on their performance as kids. So much so that young kids fail a test and commit suicide. When my family and I were in India, there was a school that was the Lalaji Memorial Omega School. Lalaji was the first master of the system that Charji built, and he allowed like lower caste people who couldn't afford college or school. Some of them lived in the ashram, and their kids would go to this school. It was a high-end school, right? It was a developed school. He had gone through the Cambridge model of education, so there was a higher level thing. There's a thing from UNESCO, and that was the UN thing, and that was they had to do something with accreditation because it had to be accredited because it just like India is such a bureaucratic nightmare. But this school, there was a kid in there, and my kids hung out with kids who went to this school, and he was scared of taking a test, and he just jumped on a train. He was like fucking 10 years old. He disappeared for like 3 months. I mean, it was crazy because of the pressure. And like I had, I don't have so many of them friends because of the whole heartfulness debacle. But somebody posted on Facebook. I used to have more friends that did the meditation, but they all fucking failed, which I'll get into in a moment. I've talked about that. It's part of where I'm going here, and we'll get to that. But where we are now is there were people that would post these fucking braggadocious pictures. There's these dopes that would hobnob with celebrities, and they'd post their pictures, but they also would boast about how successful their kids were. Oh, my kid just got an A in this big exam. I mean, it meant nothing to me and other people. And one person, an Indian person, said, you guys shouldn't post these fucking braggadocious fucking things about your kids, because some of us have kids that fail in school and like to see you're rubbing it in everyone else's face. It's like a whole thing. Because, there's so much pressure and so much is put on education. And there was a time where my first trip to India, there was this obnoxious French guy that everybody like hated. Like they just hated the guy. He was really obnoxious. But he got me in to see Master Charji. Like whatever reason, he took he was there for an extended stay. Like he was staying in India for like a couple of years, and he had whatever. He was wealthy enough where he didn't have to work, and he was a younger guy. He was about my age. I was 29 at the time, and he was he acted as Master Charji's secretary for a while, and he got me in to see him. And he was and one time he said, "Hey, we need someone to play a game," and Master Charji's grandson was there. they had this game called Carom. There's a game that I can't remember. This little ceramic rings, and there's a game that I had as a kid. It was on a wooden board. It was almost like pool, and Carom was like that, except you flicked these things with your thing, and you made it carom into the. There's these pool holes on the side of the board, and Master Chargy's grandson. Maybe there was another kid there, I can't remember, and they needed someone else to play the game, and I was like, I had fucking no interest in it. But Master Chargy's grandson, who turned out to be like a real gem, turned out to be a real nice guy, but he was really arrogant as a kid, like just horrible. I was like, wow, this kid's like a horrible kid. But he had this paper of all these games, like an advertisement, like these various games that like board games, and one of them was called Head of the Class, and he pointed to it, and he goes, I want to get this game. The kid was maybe 5-6 years old, and I'll become head of the class. They had a board game where you would want it, somehow it involved you being a really good student. And I thought about how like American kids would would never do that because there's this pressure, right? And so there's this young doctor who was, a Brahmin. So he already grew up in a class of people. The Brahmin are it's the highest level class in the Chennai region in southern India. And they often become doctors and engineers. Usually the guys become engineers and the girls become doctors. That's the goal. And he became a doctor, and he was like a good-looking guy who was really, a bright student and was kind of a celebrity in the Sajmar community. And he was telling this story about how arrogant he was. And I was like, you were arrogant back then? Like, because he seemed pretty arrogant to me. I'm like, you still, how bad were you back then if you're talking about how arrogant you used to be, right? Like, I didn't say that, but But he said that he used to tend to Master Chargy, come in and he was an allopathic doctor. And Chargy used to provoke the shit out of him. One of the jobs of the Masters of Sajmark system was to pull out, this guy's arrogance. Like he would see something and he would, needle the guy. He would go, I don't know why you're here. Allopathic medicine's a fucking joke. He wouldn't say fucking, but you get the idea. Allopathic medicine's a joke. I don't even know why and he would just, provoke the guy into rage. Like the guy would, I'd be so angry, right? He would be, he wouldn't say anything because, Chargy was his master, spiritual master, but he would be like furious. And he said he would leave and he would just be fuming for days and eventually what happened was he had this breakthrough and he started to do past life regressions with his patients. The allopathic model of medicine is very closed, it's very arrogant, it's very limited. And so the best doctors who, the ones I call healers, there's a difference between doctors and healers. And somebody with healing energy will branch out beyond their model and will, find different ways of viewing a patient because there's a lot of different models of healthcare, and some work specifically for one thing and some work for other things, right? And so the best type of people are the ones that, penetrate to that higher level or different, look at different models. And he ended up doing past life regressions and he was great at it. And it flew in the face of, the allopathic model, but sometimes he'd do a past life regression with people and they would get completely better because it had some scaric levels. This guy was also a preceptor and it would be cleaned out, right? And past life regressions is just one way to tell that there are past lives. But there's many other ways to tell that there's, you have this idea that you've been a place before. Deja vu was kind of a, possibly a past life type of memory. You have people that just click with you and you're just, there's something there between you. You really can't have a successful marriage or business partnership or friendship with anybody you haven't had a past life with. It just doesn't happen. In fact, Master Chargy said that you can't have a conversation of more than 3 minutes with somebody that you haven't had some sort of past experience with. You have those conversations with somebody, and within a minute or two, you both want to, leave. You have no connection with that person. And so you have these past lives. Some of them, you have things to work out with people. Sometimes people are more negative. You had a negative relationship with. Sometimes it's a love relationship, whatever it is, right? But you people have these experiences, and there's people out there, that you've had these experiences with where you feel like you've known them forever. And then you meet them for a very short time. I mean, when you first meet them. So the evidence is overwhelming about all this kind of stuff. The evidence of past life and future lives and things like this. And you can have visions, you can have dreams, you can have hypnosis. There's all kinds of ways that this information's there. But we live in a remedial scientific prove it to me on a material level, very material level, where you can't give people the kind of proof that they would demand from you. Where are the facts? Where are the receipts? Where are the And so, you have to have some faith in your experience, and you have to have some ability to penetrate beyond the material level to understand that there's a soul, right? There's lots of evidence of a soul, but there's no scientific evidence of a soul. And so, they've gotten it so like it's so remedial in their approach to facts, the mainstream media and the government and scientists, that they dismiss all these things because it's of a lower nature. They want to keep you on a lower nature where you're not given this information, right? And no matter what you show them, they're not going to say it exists, and they might even know it. There is a bunch of like people out there who are, in a sense, old souls, ones that are, worked for God at one time. What people think about like fallen angels, who know all this stuff is true, but they use, by keeping that knowledge from the majority of people through bullshit religions and our fucked up materialistic society. They keep you weakened where they have access to information, and they incarnate in life after life to do damage. Like they come in and they pick up where they left off, and they have control over certain things in the material world because they're pissed at God and they've taken a demonic path. And then when I talk about the controllers, it's these kind of people who have conscious awareness of past lives and future lives and all these spiritual things, but they do everything they can to withhold this information and to demonize it in the mainstream culture so that people don't have access to this information. So anybody worth anything who's going to make something of themselves has to have access to the understanding that there's past lives and future lives. They have to have working knowledge of it. They have to be able to see beyond the mundane material bullshit that our day-to-day existence, and be able to, at times, sometimes you have to engage with the mundane aspect of your life, the day-to-day bullshit, but also you have to be able to have a big picture of where you're going and these things, because otherwise death just sneaks up on you, and before you know it, you've fucked up your whole next life by living a shitty life that's like doing bad things and engaging things that you knew to be bad for you, and bad for your future existence, bad for everybody else. You've made the world a worse place, and now you owe a debt that you have to pay off in some future existence. And the debt just keeps on getting fucking bigger, right? So all this bullshit about Trump that I cover on a regular basis, I knew this going into it. And I used to cover celebrity stuff. Occasionally now I dabble in it. But none of that shit matters. Like, it's nothing. People just want to fucking... They want to see drama, and they want to see whatever fucking... Real Housewife, Kardashian, whatever. The male version of that is sports stuff, and, just the political, whatever it is. It means nothing. It's just, it's just what's happening now. And some of it has a influence on your life, but really everyone has their own issues and the things that you need to deal with. And most times people are just, they don't want to deal with the stuff they need to deal with. They don't want to change any of those things, right? So the knowledge that there's past lives and future lives and any of these things doesn't register because they just want the distraction, right? They want to be trapped in the matrix. They want to, just indulge in the stuff right in front of them. They don't want to have a level of understanding of a soul's purpose. They just want their egotistical tendencies to, celebrate those things and to, to dive into those things, whether it's some sort of an addiction or just whatever it is. I mean, it's all, I guess, addictive in one way or another. And just indulge in the mundane bullshit material lives, not worry about their death until it sneaks up on them. And they're just walking around like NPCs, completely programmed, not no thought of themselves. They just agree with what everyone else says. They try to shame people that tell them of a higher nature or something that would make them work harder. They try to that's the other thing, that there's this like fucking anti-evolution, anti-higher consciousness, anti-spirituality, anti-intellectualism, anything that's of a higher nature. It's an idiocracy, right? Where they all call the somebody who speaks with 2-syllable words or 3-syllable words, the F word, right? Because you're gay if you have any intelligence. I mean, it's the Idiocracy movie is such a wonderful example of where we're headed. And so it's a way to gatekeep people from embracing their higher nature, and to demonize and look down at people who want to get smarter, who want to get more educated, who want to evolve spiritually, who want to develop themselves, right? Like, you go to school to get some job, not to expand as a person, develop as a person. And the people who are trying to do that, it's so hard for them because everyone else has just embraced their lower nature, and people are trying to rise up, just keep on getting pulled down by their people in their lives and everything else, because people just don't want to do it. They don't want to evolve to a higher level, and they want to keep everyone down at their level. They don't want people becoming better than they are. So they there's this element to it. In my last video that was up today, I covered how Pam Bondi was saying that this is there was a guy who was arguing with some militaristic cops in front of a Subway restaurant. And he throws a sandwich at one of the cops and runs. He's wearing a pink shirt. And he's like running. The 3 cops are chasing him. And I mean, they're going to call it assault on a police officer, but he threw a Subway sandwich at the person wearing a bulletproof fucking vest. And she called it, this is what we've been dealing with, the deep state. She called this guy in the pink shirt the deep state, which was, so remedial and ridiculous that, it's just so laughable. Like, that's the deep state. I mock the shit out of it, right? Because what they've done is take narratives of understanding of a malevolent, controlling force out there, of like ancient demonic souls that are, have abandoned their spiritual duty and their spiritual process and their soul's path. And they're just stuck on this plane of existence, in some ruling capacity. And they incarnate back into these powerful families and, these types of things. Like, there's some version of that that's true. And to call some moron who throws a fucking Subway sandwich at somebody the deep state, it just shows you how they've degraded the truth community. And there's been religious degradation by the dopey, Christians who don't really represent anything that Jesus was about. The dopey Christians that they're into their religion, but they're not spiritual. They're not godly people. They gossip. They're hateful. They go to church, and they make the community worse. And, they're the exact kind of things that push people away from Christianity. Those type of people. And there's always this degradation that's involved. I wanted to talk about something personal here. I'm going to segue into that. But I saw there were a lot of comments about a few of them came on my phone, that people are laughing about the deep state thing. And somebody says, "Greetings, Paul and family. A couple of questions, please. Sometimes you sign off with the mention of the ascension." Well, every time, unless I forget. What does that refer to? So, in the Christian tradition, there is this idea of the ascension. This is not what I'm talking about, but and so it's a good word. I like the word. But this would be the souls that ascend to heaven when there's, it's in the Revelation book, which is a weird aspect of the Bible. When I was into the Bible, I really was interested in that part, because of course I was. But there's, there's a horn that comes from heaven, and all these souls just disappear and go up to heaven, and everybody else is left to deal with the hell-like conditions on earth, right? And I think that's what the ascension means in Christianity. But What I'm talking about here is in the Sajmark tradition, there is this clear plan that our current society is going to implode, right? It's going to do what it's doing right now. And the reason it's going to do that right now is the reason it's doing that is because, it is a demonic system that is taking people in the wrong direction. And no one really can debate that. Like, they could say that it isn't, but, it is. I mean, only the worst, like Trump would debate it, like dumb fucks like that. But they talk about how degraded everything is. And then they talk about how our system's great. And it's not. America sucks. If you're, all you can say is negative things about lots of people. And I mean, they're ignoring all the fucking dumb fuckery in the Trump world and all the lies and all the bullshit in the Trump world. And they're saying the Democrats are the only bad ones, and Democrats say the same thing. But anybody with half a brain can see they're both fucking really bad. And they're taking humanity in the wrong direction, right? And so, if this system collapses, what then? Like, do we go down to a caveman-like brutal level, regress, and, all these things? Or do we go to a higher level? And if there's been saints in this world, which there have been, it's been well documented, that there are people who have risen to high levels of spirituality. And they have these abilities to, especially in terms of transformation. And if people have risen to those high levels, then why can't all of us? And that's what religions fuck you over by pretending that there's these special people and you're not one of them. You're just a born sinner. Jesus is great. You're a piece of shit. Like this thing. But Jesus wasn't about that shit. Neither was any of these other souls. They were about elevating humanity. And so this is the ascension, where our current system collapses, and the people who are left here that get to incarnate will be of a higher nature, because there's a lot of low-brow people, incapable people that are on a. So some of them just haven't had enough time as a human being yet. Some of them, most people alive today, more than half the people are first timers. This is their first time as a human. And so, and it isn't, they came from a higher place, they came from a lower place. They've gone up to a higher level because there's been massive animal die-off. And that, their soul in a past existence was on a, animalistic level, and now is incarnated as a person. But anyways, so that's what the ascension means. And the person asked this, what does it refer to? How does we reconcile DNA manipulation by others with a spiritual view and perspective? I'm not sure how to answer that. And something you might assist explaining: transmission and or boons. Christians have charism, supernatural gifts. First paragraph of Wikipedia entry will give you the gist. Hope this is useful. Thank you for your content and message. Best wishes and yours regards. Transmission is purely spiritual, and it's God's love. There are things called cities that are spiritual powers. Like, you were given a city, which is it's kind of a spiritual power, but it's more material than anything else. And in ancient India, ancient times, when people lived for thousands of years, they would go and they would sit and they would pray to a divine being. And there's just various, there's a soul that's in charge of the sun, and there's a soul that's in charge of the weather, there's a soul that's in charge of, the wars, or, there's these different, anything that has that's a movement or has some play on the material level, there has to be consciousness in it, right? And there's higher developed souls that people would refer to as gods. And, Shiva and Vishnu and these, various, cosmic functionaries that were in charge of certain things. And they were higher up on the spiritual sphere, and they had powers to give. And people would do these austerities. They would sit and meditate and not eat for months at a time, not drink. I mean, people were different back then. And they would pray for a power. And one time this guy did this, like, for example, he prayed to Shiva for the power that, like, he could just touch somebody on the top of their head and he'd kill them. It was going around just fucking killing people, like this is pre-guns or whatever it was, right? I don't know what they had. But, he had this power, and he was wreaking fucking havoc. And Vishnu went to Shiva and said, what the fuck did you give him this power for? He said, well, the guy did his austerities, and when you did these things, the higher developed soul had nothing, they had to give you what you asked for. And so Vishnu incarnated as a beautiful woman and said to the guy, well, if you want to have me, you have to go fucking bathe, you gross fuck. And so the guy went and washed, and you have to wash your hair, and the guy touched himself on top of the head, and he eviscerated himself, right? But this is a good example, whether it's true or not, that these powers were given randomly to dumb fucks who misused them. And almost everybody with a spiritual power ends up, it hurts them in some way. It's an unfortunate thing that people rise to high levels and Jesus had some spiritual fall, right? Jesus forgot about God and started to serve the people that followed him. And that fucked him over because that's what happens, he started to serve people instead of God. And then they turned on him because that's what fucking happens, right? Like, you can never forget that you're serving God and that you serve the people that God sends you to serve, but you're never serving those people. You're to do what's best, and then they start pandering to the people and start doing what the people want because that's just what human nature is. And there's been so many higher developed souls that get sucked in by the fucking the gross desires of human beings. They're praying for this, they're praying for that, right? The second master of the Sajmarg system, he started to hear prayers. And during World War II, he was hearing the prayers of, the Germans praying to kill the Allied nations, Americans and Russians, and they'd hear the Allied nations praying to kill the Germans. And he's like, what do I do here? They're, do I kill them all? Like, like this idea that they're praying for things, like collective prayers, like not just the soldiers, but the whole countries of people are praying to kill the other side, right? It becomes this, massive amount of prayers going up for war, for victory and things like this. And, how does God decide which prayers to answer? And humans, when they rise up to a certain level, they just are able to hear these things, right? Okay, so I had to stop talking around 10, something like that. And, I had a big day of working outside, beautiful day. And, we have 13 new chicks, including 3 guinea fowl that are growing gangbusters. And I had a chicken, my favorite chicken. She's bronze chicken, the one my wife named Copper. And she's just really neat looking. And she disappeared about 2 weeks ago. And, we've had some raccoon issues. And she was I think she was the youngest chicken we had. And she was, pretty, she was more tame than some of the other ones. The lavender Orpingtons we have are very, they'll walk right up to you. And she used to walk up to me. So she was, around more. A neat looking, cute little chicken. One of the smaller chickens we had. Lays cool little pink eggs. And she disappeared. And I didn't realize it for about 2 or 3 weeks. And then I said, she's gone. And the other chickens we have, the golden Wyandottes, I'm able to pick up. They come up fairly close because we raised those guys. And I really like the way the golden Wyandottes look. I don't have any pictures of them. And so the other day I saw her and I'm like, oh my gosh, she must have been broody. So when a chicken goes broody, they might find a spot and hide away from you. And I finally find the spot today in the old chicken coop that we don't really use because we're getting it ready to put the chicks in. So she has about 18 eggs in there. I'm going to do a whole bunch of videos on that at some point. And hopefully she'll, so we got rid of the roosters, so I don't know if all the eggs are fertilized. And she has a lot of eggs for a small chicken. She has to keep it at a certain humidity using her feathers in her body and also keep it at a certain temperature. And it's been very hot and, hopefully she hatches some of them out because that'd be pretty cool. But we're going to have a shit ton of little baby chicks. We already have, 13 chicks that are about almost pullet size, medium size. And they're going to go in our old coop. And then she's going to be in there. She's going to hatch out her chicks, so we'll see what happens. Should be fairly interesting. So I was doing that stuff today. My tooth is definitely improving. The treatment I'm giving it, which I'll eventually talk about in a video, especially if I can cure it completely. But at the very least, it is It made it stopped the infection, and I felt a lot better the other day. I felt like I kind of turned the corner physically. My energy level returned a little bit, so I'm still tired and doing a lot of work. Even with being tired, I'm walking at least 7 miles a day, sometimes up to 11 miles a day, and then doing all this work here. So it's not like I'm incapacitated. It's just that I have to use my will force to get myself going, and also could be a result of like a spiritual time. But anyways, I want to talk about something completely different here, different from what I was just talking about, but tied into what I was saying earlier. You know, um, I've been kind of aware of my limitations as the role that I'm kind of needing to embrace to whatever extent. Building a community or a neighborhood, there's survival. There's people who can homestead, people with skills, people with those types of things, right? Which is, a good thing to have in your neighbors. You have a community of neighbors that help each other out. And, we have to go back to the old model of a village-based model and people in the neighborhood being there for each other, which is, people now don't even know their neighbors often. Sometimes have bad relationship, if any kind of relationship at all, with their neighbors. And you don't really need your neighbors. But for it to be really worthwhile to me and anything significant, it would have to involve Sajmark. Somebody wrote to me that they were into Eastern practices, someone interested in the community. And I'm like, well, that's great, but that's not what there's a difference between Eastern practices and doing Sajmark meditation. I mean, it's always great if your neighbors have some kind of relationship with God and, real relationship with God and are more than just some fake pretending to be religious people. I mean, that's at least better in some ways and more understanding. If they're truthers, that's great too. They can have more shared understanding. But for me, it's about the Sajmark system. It's my only real motivation because I believe it's the solution to the problem of modern day life because of the cleaning and transmission and the philosophy and reestablishing an internal relationship with God and deepening it and making it more accessible. And so, it's to me the only reason. Like, if people are trying to survive this collapse of our modern day civilization, I wouldn't be really wanting to be involved with building the same thing back again. Or some, shitty version of it, some, watered down version of it with a little bit of religion mixed in, or, some other system. Like, I have no interest in any of that shit, right? It's got to be a total change in the whole orientation towards humanity. Or it's just, we're just spinning our wheels. It's got to be drastic changes. I mean, that's what's needed here. Like a total, like an evolutionary, genetic mutation and evolutionary movement for people to change drastically. And so, like, that's the only thing that I would care about. Like, everything else is just, I mean, you might as well just keep on going the same way we're going and like, just accept our inevitable excising out of our species because we're just a failed species. Like, there's things that go extinct. Everything goes extinct at some point, and the human beings of today have to go extinct. We have to be something better. There has to be an upgrade. There has to be an evolutionary movement at a spiritual level. It's not like we need wings or something, or we need superpowers. We need to be, less narcissistic, less egotistical, and that would take a change of every aspect of our system, less addictive, less impulsive, less emotional, negatively emotional. The lower base less hateful, less angry, less fearful. All these things. There has to be just a complete upgrade to a higher level of consciousness. Other than, like, fuck it, who gives a shit what happens to us? But I was thinking about this, the community thing, the neighborhood. It's not really a community. I've been around various types of communities. I've been around, teams, getting a team together, families, coworkers, spiritual, whatever it is, the Sajmarg, spiritual stuff, the people that do the community Yabiasis, which means spiritual aspirant. I've been in, a church for a long time, 2 different churches, schools, things like that, right? Peers, coworkers, whatever, neighborhoods. And, when you're in a group situation, we started to study group dynamics when I was getting my master's in counseling. Very interesting to me, group dynamics. The first time my family and I got chickens, we just sat and watched them because they have 20 or so different sounds, or maybe more. And they have cool sounds, cooing sounds. They have, they're very smart, and they have a group identity, a pecking order. And it's really interesting. I had this one crazy hen that she ended up getting some kind of bleeding on the back of her head. And all the other chickens were eating her blood and pecking the back of her head, and it made her crazy. And I grabbed her. I was able to catch her. And I took a wad of wet, clay, mud clay, and I just put it over it because I didn't have anything else. There's a stuff you can get, this purple stuff my wife uses that you can put on a hen that's getting pecked. It happened to a few different hens where they ended up bleeding, and the other hens just come up and start pecking the back of their head, eating the blood, and before you know it, the chicken's dead. And she would, I'd open the coop every morning, and she'd run off down to the pasture, avoiding all the other hens. And because she was crazy, she ended up being in a weird place in the pecking order. And one time there were 3 hens, and we had 2 of these buckets where I used to throw the chicken feed, this sort of rubbery plastic. And there was 2 places where they could eat, and all 3 of the hens it was like rock, paper, scissors. Each one was dominant over another hen. And so it would, so the hen would chase away the other hen that was eating. I got this on video. It's an old video. I have to find that some place and put it up, but it's kind of interesting. And the one hen would chase away the other hen that it was dominant over, and that hen was dominant over the other hen that was eating at the other bowl. And so it would chase that hen out, who was dominant over the first hen that was eating at the first bowl. And so they just went back and forth like 3 stooges. I videoed it for like 10 minutes. And every once in a while, I would just start watching the chickens because of their social dynamics. But it's very interesting, the dynamics that are at play in human dynamics, human social systems, and how each person reacts to social situations and roles that people have to play, and people embracing roles, and people sabotaging the group because they don't like their role, and all the things that happen. I mean, group dynamics are very interesting in the human culture because of jealousy and hatred and whatever petty things that people have going on. It's hard to get a cohesive, functioning group, whether it's a family, whether it's a work environment, or any of these other things. In the past, that wasn't the case. Like, this is modern history. People just don't get along and don't work cooperatively. And so, when my family and I started homesteading, and I realized that if there was going to be a total collapse of civilization at some point, that we would need more than our family. Let's say my kids all stayed, and we built the intergenerational family farm, and my ex had been, crazy, and all the things that she brought to the table, and all the, just all of it. And I had been better at whatever I was a better person and the stuff I needed to be. And we are all fully functional. It's not enough people, even with kids and grandkids and whatever. You need a community of people to, in terms, if you're going to replace grocery stores, if you're going to replace all the things that are needed, in terms of the modern day medical system, whatever you need you need someone to be a midwife. You need you need all these different types of things. And every person becomes so important because it's like you need a blacksmith, and you need each person has to have some of these skills, and someone has to be an expert in those things, and you need a whole community of people, right? And without it, it doesn't function. The whole community. Because, you can go without some things, before you know it, you're having deprivation because you don't have enough people, and you don't have enough resources, and you're you're eating too much of the same foods, and you don't have enough variation or variety or all these things, right? But then when I went to see if there's other people that would like to join me and my family, and I was hoping that'd be Sajmar Gabiasis, and none of them wanted to do it, even though there was these prophecies. I mean, one of them's about to hit in 2025, 2026. I've read those. All the Whispers prophecies are part of one of my videos. I should probably link that at some point into the description box. But, and these prophecies are not just the only place where it says it. This idea that civilization was going to have to collapse to give birth to an ascension, to a new world where spirituality would be at its base, built on a base of spirituality. And so none of them were interested. None of them wanted to prepare. No one wanted to fucking hear about it. I'm like, you're not reading the fucking books, right? It was kind of stunning to me. That stupid fuck Kamlesh, when he was becoming the master, he commented on me and my family and said, they have the right idea, but they're doing it too early. And I'm like, if anything, we were doing it too late, right? I mean, learning homesteading skills and learning these things, it isn't like you just, all right, civilization's over, let's do the other thing. It takes years and years of retraining yourself. And I knew that people weren't capable of that. As I began to understand it from my own struggle, and my family's, each individual in this family struggle with, retraining your stuff. I mean, my kids were born into it a little bit. But when you have to retrain your lifestyle and your persona and develop these habits and skills, any kind of change takes some time to integrate. And, when people had the ability to go to Walmart and go to fucking Whole Foods and go, to restaurants, and all you need is money, it's hard to go and get a garden. You can see that there's my wife and I harvested all the stuff in that one picture. I have these 3 pictures, two of the hens, one of the hen, one of the eggs, and one of the garden, or the tomatoes and peppers and things we're collecting. And there's so much stuff there, we couldn't pick all of it. I mean, when I took the picture, we picked maybe twice as much as what I had when I took the picture. And there's so much more there. Of course, we can't eat all that, and the tomatoes are going bad, and we got bunny rabbits coming in eating them, and some insects and things. But it's there's this abundant time right now where there's a harvest. But if we process the tomatoes, but we don't have to do that because we can buy canned tomatoes. My wife is canned tomatoes, with the glass, the mason jars. But it's good to do, and it's good to have those skills, but we don't need to do it, right? We can go get the stuff at the store. So, I realized that people would not be motivated based in a prophecy or based in something might happen. People wouldn't be motivated into changing to the kind of people that could live in a community together. And, there's this place where we bought our cows called Twin Oaks, and it's in Virginia where we used to live. And it was based in the Skinner, the behaviorist Skinner. They only have 100 people. You have to give all your money away or put it in I don't know what you do with your money. When you come into the community, you have to be broke. You have to be like everybody else, minimal amount of things. And they make hammocks and sell hammocks. I mean, they used to do this. I don't know what they do now. They had dairy cows, and they would eat some of the cows, the dairy cows. They had Dutch-belted dual-purpose cows that you would eat, and they would also milk. So there's people who worked in the dairy. And we had bought some of their cows. They sold some of their cows. And they had an incredible garden. And there was some old sort of, Christian Southern lady going, yeah, they're weird. Because they were like a nudist colony. My ex drove my kids in there one day. I wasn't there. And there's like women topless in the garden, shit like that. But this woman goes, they're a little weird over there, but they have bodacious vegetables. Like their vegetables they're really good at growing these things. And I talked to this one guy when we bought the cow. We bought 2 of the cows from them. And our cows, Phoebe and Pezra, who were sisters, they named all the cows like the same initial, same letter. And so this year was the P year. probably around 2004 or 5, maybe early 2002 when we got the cows in like 2005. And, we milked the cows, and the people came with a couple of these Twin Oaks people came over our house a few times, and we met them. We socialized that we knew one of these people a little bit. And I asked the guy what it was like living there. He said, it's like being married to 100 people. Like they always had 100 people. It was like there was, once in a while they had a couple openings. But, it was a struggle. Like the people I talked to over there, these communities, it's difficult, and you have to train yourself to live in them. Years before that, I was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and my ex and I got together there, and we were both preceptors at the time. And there was a community of people that wanted to start doing the meditation. And we went over to the house, and there were people like living in closets, like sleeping in closets. It was a weird group of people. There was a woman she was like the head guy, and she was married to the head guy, and he had a huge tumor, like on one side of his nose. It was kind of off-putting, and he had been with another woman and had a kid with her, and she was in the house, and her sister. There was a preceptor that was where I started in Massachusetts, a older Jewish woman, and her sister was in this community, and her sister was a doctor. And so she got together with this woman who I guess turned into a lesbian, who used to be with the leader, and the leader now was with this younger woman who I think he had another kid with, and she got cancer and just chose not to get it treated and died. Like that happened like after we gave all these people introductory sittings. But I remember getting sick because when you clean people's systems, sometimes you get negatively affected as a preceptor, like slightly, not a big deal, but it was so many people starting at once. And it was a weird, dynamic, weird, strange, fucking cult-like place. It was part of a bigger cult. And they started the meditation. A few of them really loved it, and they stuck with it, and only really one of them stayed. I think she's a preceptor now. She wasn't living in the house with these people, but she was part of the community. She was married to a doctor. She had a nice house on the mountains with a great view. I'm not sure what happened to her or not, but it was weird. These communities are weird. People have trouble just being in marital relationships. Marital relationships fail. And so I knew without the proper motivation, people just won't do it, right? Because, it's just so much easier. What you usually end up getting is desperate people. There was a guy who I was friends with on Facebook, and he was into helping people. He was like kind of a guy with a burnout looking kind of, he had a long hair and a beard. Seemed like he's kind of rough. He sometimes post videos shaming all the people. He had at one time got a bunch of old computers for some poor people in Africa. And he also was given some land in Kentucky where he was going to try to start a community. But he was broke, kind of homeless. And, he was kind of begging people for money for the community, and it wasn't really a community. It was pointless, right? And he got a low-life, desperate people, unemployed people that would come and live with him, borderline homeless people. And, he had an exchange with this woman who came over and brought all this meat for them because she wanted to have them dry meat so they would have dry meat in the fucking winter, right? They'd have, that she would, like a smoked meat, right? And she was cooking it for them and drying it and trying to, get them to have it for the summer, and everybody just kept on eating it. And she wrote a kind of a response saying, I was just kind of doing that so you guys would have something to, she was trying to help them out, and they're so hungry over there. So it was such a weird fucking thing. And she said, the guy who ran it was an expert forager. And she said, well, you can, why don't you forage? And he wasn't an expert forager because he brought another guy in who was supposed to be an expert forager. and he was taking dandelion heads. I eat dandelions and dandelion leaves, my wife and I, in the spring because they're loaded with good things for your liver. And once in a while, I take some of these pills, but they're really good for your liver. And they come out in the spring, and like it's part of a good spring clean. I'm not recommending anything, but it's something I do. But this guy was frying them in beer batter, and I'm like, that's not like that's not foraging, right? Like you. And then the guy who was running the thing was like, man, you're really good. I'm not nearly as good as you are at foraging. And I'm like, foraging is going out and looking and knowing plants that are, a lot of the weeds are very high in nutrition, and a lot of them have a lot of great properties for healing properties and things that you can make tinctures out of. And I know a little bit about it, but I don't know a ton. But I knew more than these two clowns, right? I knew more than to fry fucking something that's herbal and good for your liver in polyunsaturated fat with a beer batter. I mean, it's like the worst thing you can do is like turning something healthy into a McNugget. But anyways, the guy disappeared at some point. A bunch of people who lived with him took all his tools. They didn't really have a house. I mean, they were kind of living in tents and, whatever it is. So the bottom line is communities are very difficult. And people get, whatever kind of issues they have. And so then there's that part. But what I realized yesterday, and I don't say I've realized it, it's been there for me to, I have thought about this at different times. And I've actually talked about it in different ways. But in terms of the gratefulness meditation and building a neighborhood and community, I would have to think that people would be able to do the impossible. That I would have to expect more out of them than people who had been in the Sajmarg mission for many years and had time with, one or two of the masters of the system and had all this spiritual training and cleaning and read all these books and, had been a part and volunteered and did work and, been a part of that community, but couldn't do some essential things that I would expect people who are coming into this, gratefulness pockets of the future neighborhood thing to be able to do. So it's a real fucking problem, because it's just unrealistic, right? And I lack so many of the qualities I would need to help make this thing work. It's, it's kind of daunting. And I want to talk about that just a little bit here. So first of all, the people in the Sajmarg system, in the very first book that you read, Reality at Dawn by the second master Babaji, he talks about this upcoming world, the end of our current world. The future world will be built on the bones and ashes of our current world. And if you don't think this guy's full of shit, which all the people who do the system would think about this guy as being the highest developed spiritual person ever on planet Earth. Like that's how many of the people who knew him and experienced the transmission and cleaning. And many of these people were higher developed souls from previous lives, people who were around Jesus and Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda, these famous spiritual people, part of the Mahabharata and some of these other things. People who had been in multiple spiritual movements, who had been a part of these, around these higher developed souls who are working, as part of this spiritual, the spiritual movement that has gone on planet Earth for hundreds of thousands of years. And these people, including myself, have been a part of some of these things in the past and have some talent and some experience and also a lot of destiny tied to this thing. And even with all that, they couldn't accept these things that he said. They just blew him off, especially the Indian people. And, this was never a doomsday cult that focused on these things, but they are there for people to see. And occasionally were mentioned. And then the whispers of the Brighter World prophecies came out. And they weren't willing to even think about those things as being real. I talked to numerous people, and I was pretty much stunned that they were just blowing them off. I'm like, you have inside information here. And, you're doing something by doing the spiritual practice, maybe the most important thing, but you also have to start adjusting yourself and realizing our system's coming to an end when, like everybody kind of sees it now, But I was talking about this 20, 30 years ago. And not that I'm some doomsday person. I fucking knew, like, this was not a good system. I knew the system was full of shit, even as a kid. And I knew it wasn't going to last forever. And then it became more and more clear it was going to probably die an ugly death in my lifetime, right? And so even with the writing on the wall and the people they most respect telling them what was going to happen, they wouldn't do shit to, to prepare themselves for what was about to happen. And so did I say this thing about Dodgy? I think I already did. I was thinking it. I don't know if I said it. But I'll say it again here because it fits here anyway. So there's a time where Dodgy said, I did say this earlier, where Dodgy said, they're doing the wrong thing. They're doing the right thing. They're just doing it at the wrong time. And I'm like, you can't wait till 2025, 26 is coming. And then, all the things are going to happen afterwards. And we've lost so many skills and so much. We have an unrealistic expectation and entitlements to what we consider our lifestyle that doesn't really exist for most people. And so the poor people who do have to live in this way, especially in India, they don't get enough protein and nutrition to develop their brains and have the capacity to do abstract thinking and things. They have skills, primitive skills, because they live in huts and shit like that, and they're really impoverished. And so they know this kind of lifestyle that, they know how to survive this kind of thing. But they don't really, they're not worth much more than that because of their inability for higher level thinking. And so, the people who are elite level in India, there's a guy who, one of the sort of elders in the system was telling me, he goes, that guy over there, like if he was an American, he'd be like, look at that motherfucker over there. I went over his house, and he has servants tie his own shoes, tie his shoes for him. He doesn't even put on his own fucking shoes, right? Some of these elitist people, they have the caste system there, and they have all these servants, and so for them, they would never think about doing any of this, what they would consider primitive work, farming, dirty work or whatever. And so they're all fucked. And Americans, the hippies and the liberals, they were just kind of worthless from the get-go. So, they weren't able to adjust themselves to the teachings of the system. This thing is going to happen. We should prepare for it, and at the very least accept it's going to happen. And they didn't even want to talk about it. So I realized that was fucked early on. And then, when Dodgy went south, when Dodgy ended up being a piece of shit, the response that these people have given is pathetic. And not that I want to say I'm so much better than them or whatever, but for me, I was so low functioning before I started doing Saj Marg. I was so unmotivated, and there's nothing appealed to me, and I was kind of detached from, I was low functioning and detached, and I didn't really have a purpose or a goal. And then once I experienced the transmission and cleaning the Saj Marg system, it was transformative. And, it's changed me, and it's made me into whatever value I have here and other places. It's enhanced my ability to do work and conceptualize things. And so many ways it's helped me. And when this shit started to go down with the Heartfulness debacle, when Saj Marg became Heartfulness under this fuckhead Dodgy, and he just started doing stupid ass shit, and I started to learn more and more about it, I didn't have the transmission and cleaning the way I used to. And it made me realize that how much I needed it. Of course I knew it before, but even it was there. And then one day I just felt the transmission outside of anything to do with Dodgy and Heartfulness. There was a gathering, the Lology birthday gathering in February of 2023. And I'm like, great, I can just connect directly, and I don't need the organization, and I don't have to deal with these fuckheads anymore who had kind of turned on me and ostracized me because of things I said to Dodgy about, some of his incompetent bullshit. I said it in a nice way, but Dodgy's a lot like Trump. He got a little pouty and whatever, fucking, he's kind of a little bitch. And so, and I eventually called him that in a video where these people heard. It was a whole thing, right? But there were a bunch of people who were happy I started reporting on Dodgy being a piece of shit. No one else would say it. And there was a number of people in India that were just dumbfounded on what this guy was doing. But their inability to deal with it, they started making memes. Somebody made a meme with like a monkey and a bear, and I don't know which one I was. And it said something about Paul. Why won't Dodgy answer Paul's questions? And I'm like, Jesus Christ, you guys. Don't make me the face of your fucking bullshit thing that you're going on there. And I kind of backed away from it because I didn't want to be part of that shit, right? But, even the ones who were resistant and knew that Dodgy was full of shit, many of them quit the whole system, which to me it was something, I feel like the system quit me, right? Dodgy quit this doing Sajmarg, and I was able to connect to the energy and the essence on my own, which is great. And these people started to write to me anonymously from India, and how fucked up the thing was, and some people slammed me in comment sections, or some people were calling for my assassination on Reddit or some, not WhatsApp or one of those fucking things. All of them anonymous and just piece of shit, all of them, on both sides of the thing. The inability to figure out what to do. There's this guy Dodgy Truther who will sign he's not anonymous, and he's been posting these things and confronting people, arguing with some of the people higher ups. And this guy, I call him the Dodgy Truther because he's trying to do the InfoWars thing with Dodgy, and it's not working because the system's so corrupt, and Dodgy he's hobnobbing with politicians and all these things. It's the chances of the system coming down on Dodgy or people waking up to what he's doing. It's just not going to happen. And so, they haven't figured out what to do. And I did. And it wasn't that hard. And I was, I don't want to give myself more credit than, it just happened organically. But when it happened for me, I knew there were these people I told about Heartfulness who now were feeling the same way, and they were kind of disillusioned with Dodgy, and they kind of liked the practice. And so I did the Gratefullness meditation channel so that those people could experience what I was experiencing, and we could sort of meditate together. Eventually, I had a dream where I became a preceptor again, and I was made chargy in some dream, and I started doing the sittings again, and they went really well. And so there's a whole thing, it kind of all fell into place. And so, I'm good at all those kind of things. I'm good at saying fuck you to organizations and people. I'm good at doing things on my own, and, these things. I mean, just all the things that have been part of this. But I'm not great at taking the next step. And I just can't do it, without divine intervention. But the problem is that people have abilities in their soul. Like whenever you do something, there's the high end of you doing it, straight from your soul, doing it the way your soul would do it, a masterful job, like doing something, whatever it is, like whatever work you're doing, whatever your things you're doing in your life, relationships, there's your high end, like where the part of you that's divine just rises up and does it on a high level. And then there's, all the other levels in between that and complete failure, right? Like you can do, egotistical things on one end and embrace your soul on the other. And you never know what people are going to do. But for the most part, they flirt with the higher, but they embrace the lower. It's a real unfortunate part of modern day life. And, I've accepted it, like as part of what people are going to do. And people lack the motivation to really to bow down before God and with tears in their eyes, beg for forgiveness, realize they're a piece of shit, but not in some self-deprecating way, but, like realizing they're failing and they need to do better and asking God to help them to elevate their, into being something better. And people just don't do that. And, until they do, it's sort of a crapshoot. And, I guess I want to wrap it up with this. That everybody who does the Sajmarg system has a capability of becoming what the masters of the system became. Each person is capable of self-mastery. It sets the system apart from other systems because you don't worship the master of the system. The master of the system is an example of what you can become. And every person has that divine essence, that soul within them, that spiritual essence. And when you fully embrace your soul and minimize your ego, you become something. And each person, who masters themselves, right? It's self-mastery. And you become the highest level of divine being that you can become by embracing your divine side. And each person has that potential. So the Sajmark system has examples of what that's like when somebody reaches that level. And they also help to pull you up to that level. And everybody flirts with it, dabbles with it. People are, there's more failures than successes, especially now, these days. But, it's something that you can become. And the third master of the system, Charji, was editing some books for Babaji. Babaji he seemed like he was dyslexic, and, he was very limited in some of his capacity, the business side, the organizational side, and some of these other things. But he was, spiritually, he's had no equal or peer in terms of earthly people. His stuff that he's brought in, the spiritual stuff that he's experienced and has, brought in for other people is like second to none. But, he had this guy, Charji, who was just good at everything. He was good at running the organization. He's good at all these things. And Charji was like 6'4", 6'3". Babaji was about 5 foot. Quite different. And Charji was reading some of Babaji's writings, and Babaji wrote, I never thought that what was my master's was not also mine. Meaning that everything that was his master's, which was also coming from God, was also his. Every quality he needed to embrace, everything he needed to do to accomplish his goals, all the powers, all the things he needed, were there at his disposal. And Charji said he read that and he believed it full-heartedly himself, right? But, for the rest of us, we don't want to become what the master is, because we want to have our selfish time. We want to indulge in our selfish behaviors. We don't want to serve God and people all the time. And we don't want to just be, somebody who's master themselves is full-time. Every thought that they have, every action that they exhibit, everything that they do is done with the idea of serving God in some way. And not in a self-serving way, but literally serving God. And most people don't want to do that. It's hard to embrace, that's why we have our own limitations and our own, the self-imposed limitations. That, everything that's God is also yours. God is your Father, and God is giving you, everything that God has is there for every living being to embrace, and it's also yours, right? Whatever God has created, whatever God is, whatever God thinks, whatever God does, is also something that you could aspire to be like. You can be, you can't be God, but you can be God-like, right? You can embrace your higher nature. And, I get that applies to me as well, but, some of these qualities, they might be buried in me somewhere. But, I just, the wind has gone out of my sails for people. Because I just don't think people are going to do anything great, are going to change in any dramatic way. Even, I could change a lot more than I have, but, even to the level that I've changed, that I've, been able to change as a person, people just aren't into it. Like, I can just see it over and over again, through, just look at the view count to my spiritual videos. Like, this video will get so many less views. And it's so much more important than my other stuff that I do. Mocking Trump or making jokes about celebrities. It's, the higher nature stuff, the stuff that could actually help people, people reject because they don't want to be helped. Because they don't want to change, right? And so, it's a sad state of affairs. But, hopefully there'll be some kind of movement. I'm starting to fade out here, so I got to wrap this one up. I might have some more thoughts about this, but I just, but anyways, that's kind of where we are right now. And I think the motivation will come in when people don't have grocery stores and are living in a toxic world with, radioactive activity from, nuclear war and all that shit, and where people finally wake the fuck up and realize they have to be better than they are and want some redemption, right? People don't feel like they need to redeem themselves. And, everybody fucking does. Anyways, only spirituality will save this world. It's paramount, definitely important for the apocalypse. And the ascension, everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.